advancement with being a civilized society. Because I promise you that there have been an infinite amount of places on Earth that are more socially advanced than whatever the place is we live now. But that is neither here nor there, because today we're going on a field trip to Malta. Ooh. Now the dates for Malta's settlement go back to about 5,900 BCE, which is nearly 8,000 years ago. So Malta has been inhabited for a very long time. But as you won't be surprised to know, Graham Hancock doesn't like that date. Now, like he did at the Pyramid of Cholula, Graham Hancock does meet with another expert on some of the megalithic sites on Malta, none other than Katja Stroud, who responded to this series by saying that her words were taken grossly out of context. Something I'm not remotely shocked about, considering in our last episode where we interviewed Dr. McCafferty, he said that his words were also sort of spliced up, and he wasn't even told that he was meeting with Graham Hancock in the first place. Yeah, really good diligence on that one. But either way, at the end of this series, Katja Stroud released a statement saying that her words were taken grossly out of context and were used to support Hancock's claim more than she actually did. But you know, what does academic honesty matter anymore? Just, you know what, take this whole video, chop it up, and you can make a YouTube poop out of me. I can say whatever the hell you want me to say. In this episode, Graham Hancock takes us to the megalithic site known as Gigantea. All confirmed archaeological evidence points to Gigantea being built around 3,500 BCE. So how do you date a site like this? How do we know how old it is? You can carbon date the soil underneath the stones because there would be no more soil buildup once a stone is on top of it. You can also cross-check with a bunch of different pottery shards and material culture left behind, something which Graham Hancock doesn't even mention throughout the course of this show. But Maltese archaeologists who responded to his series pointed out the fact that he left out literally the entire human history of the island, which is recorded in multiple thousands of pieces of pottery shards from all over the place. But Graham Hancock's biggest claim for Gigantea is that people didn't just wake up one morning and decide to build this. Graham, nobody on Earth thinks that people just woke up one morning and decided to build this. What the hell kind of an argument is that? This underlines a theme that we have seen at the beginning of every single episode so far, where Graham Hancock will make something seem impossible so that he can set it up so that you don't really trust it, so that he can give you his answer later. Nobody would ever tell you that people woke up one morning and decided to say this, but by implying that this is what mainstream academia wants you to think, he can just give you whatever answer he wants later because he's already sowed the seeds of doubt in the first minute and a half of the series. So the interesting thing about Gigantea is it is one of many structures like this on Malta. In fact, there are 19 other temples, I believe, that are similar to Gigantea in size, scope, and style. Graham Hancock quickly goes into the lore of Gigantea, saying that the folklore around it is that it was built by a giant. Thankfully, he immediately says that he doesn't think they were literal giants, but, you know, intellectual giants, which I'm glad that he said, and something that I could agree with. I think that if there is, you know, basis to this folklore, I'm sure they're not talking about actual giants, they're talking about a giant of a person, you know? But I'm sure that most of the TikTok conspiracy theorists probably stopped listening after it was built by giants, and so I'll have to deal with that for the next 2 years. Now, Graham Hancock's claim is that these temples were already on Malta by the time Sicilian farmers made it to Malta at the end of the last ice age. Now, what is his evidence for this? It's a great question. Nothing. He doesn't have any. Now, he does claim that during the last glacial maximum, sea levels were about 400 feet lower, which is true. And so it would have been warm and abundant, and people would have wanted to migrate across it through the land bridges that were now exposed. Now, it is very possible that humans made it to Malta when it was a hill instead of an island. In fact, we actually have evidence of this. In the later part of the episode, he talks to Dr. Anton Mifsud, who talks about how they found Neanderthal teeth in one of the caves there. However, since Neanderthals went extinct like 40,000 years ago, it doesn't really prove his point much. Now, let's say that Homo sapiens did make it to Malta, you know, at the time when the sea levels were the lowest. I think it's completely possible. Do I think that they built these structures? Probably not. And if they did manage to stay on Malta after the sea levels had come back up, it is far more likely that they ended up going regionally extinct by the time that the Sicilian farmers ended up showing up there and subsequently building Gigantea. Graham Hancock really loves that there were these Neanderthal teeth found in the Gardalam cave. He harps on and on about how not enough research was done on it and how an attack on the paradigm is an attack on archaeologists. I promise you, there is no one on Earth who would not want their name on the discovery of those Neanderthal teeth. So he talks to Dr. Anton Mifsud, who paid to have the teeth dated and was able to prove that they were in fact Neanderthal teeth. Again, all very interesting. Does not prove a damn thing, unless you're saying that the Atlanteans were Neanderthals, in which case this story has gotten a whole lot worse. I think that was the shortest amount of time that one of my title cards has been up there. Hancock's next piece of evidence is cart ruts. Now, the cart ruts are pretty interesting. They're these long worn paths in Malta's stone that look like cart ruts. Go figure. Now, it's kind of hard to date these considering it's just negative space in a rock, but estimates say that they're probably about 2,500 years old. And no one really knows exactly what they are. There is theories that they truly are cart ruts, but there's also theories that it's irrigation or something like that, but no one really knows for sure. Now, does us not knowing mean that the only option is something mysterious, mystical, and Atlantis? No, obviously not. Just because we don't know something doesn't mean that it has to have some sick, uncharted ending. Now, Malta's rocks are very soft, so it wouldn't take long for something like this to form, even though it looks pretty dramatic. But Hancock claims that this 26,000 year date is completely wrong, and that these cart ruts must be far older, built at the same time as Gigantea and all the other temples and whatnot. So, what evidence does he actually give to this? Well, Graham Hancock claims that he has researched the cart ruts himself and has scuba dived to cart ruts which are 25 meters underwater. Now, he doesn't show these cart ruts, he doesn't go to them, and he doesn't cite where they are, so I have no way of actually confirming this, but I'm gonna just assume he's telling the truth here. He says that finding cart ruts 25 meters underwater proves that this site dates to, everyone say it with me, 12,800 years ago. Now, I'd like us all to gather around here. Take a look at this graph. This is the sea level rise at the end of the last ice age, or I guess at the beginning of this interglacial period. Now, you'll notice something interesting about this, and that is that at about 25 meters, we're only looking at a date of around 7,000 years ago, which is really weird because Graham Hancock is saying that this site is 12,800 years old. About 12,800 years ago, the sea levels were about 80 meters or 250 feet lower than they are today, and Malta would have looked like this. Instead of being 2 islands, it would have been 1. So if Graham had suddenly found cart ruts that were 80 meters underwater, I'd be a lot more inclined to agree with him about this date. But Graham says that the cart ruts he saw were only 25 meters below the water line. We also don't know if this is at high tide or low tide, which is something that could fluctuate the water by multiple feet and be able to change this date by thousands of years. But let's just assume 25 meters is right. Great, then that would place it to be about 6,000 years ago. And Malta would look like that, by the way. So what's my point with that? That evidence is bad and doesn't even support the claim that he makes about it. Next point. Okay, this is where we get into the real red thread part of this conspiracy theory, so everyone put on your tinfoil hats and turn to the next page. Hancock works with Lenny Rejik, who studied the directions and orientations of Malta's temples. They claim that Menidra is oriented with the solstice, which is not surprising at all. There's many things oriented with the solstice because, again, everybody on Earth can see the sun. We're gonna get into that in another episode. But you know how I told you that there's like 19 other temples on Malta that are sort of similar to Menidra and to Gigantea? Well, the theory is that every single one of them is oriented towards the star Sirius, which is the second, twice as bright as the next brightest star in the sky, and it's super important. And they back this up by saying that every time Sirius would wander across the sky, they would build a new temple and have the doorway facing at where Sirius would rise, which is why almost all the temples on Malta are facing the same direction with mild inconsistencies in the way that the doorway faces. Now, this is the meat and potatoes of this episode. This is something that they really try to hammer home because this is their best evidence for all of these temples being built to be oriented towards Sirius, and that's how they're going to date the temples. So how do they go on to support that all these temples were built around the same time? Well, they take their theory that they all point towards Sirius, they look at where Sirius was in the sky, boom, what do you know? All the temples were built before 12,800 years ago. Bob's your uncle, and everyone's lying to you. The government is lying to you. Okay, now, I've been waiting for this one because this is a really fun This is a really fun debunk. So the theory is that all of these temples have their doorways facing towards Sirius. And then every time Sirius would wander across the sky a little bit, they would build a new temple and have that doorway facing towards Sirius. But what you'll notice is that all of the doorways face in pretty much the same direction. And if we do a little map of Malta here, all of the doorways face more or less in this direction at like slight variations in angle. Okay, so what else happens in that direction? Let's, I don't know, throw some spitballs out there. Any suggestions from the class? What's that? The sun? Wow, that's a phenomenal idea. You're really going somewhere, kid. When you're building a gigantic stone box, not a lot of light gets into it. And I don't know about you, but I want light in my giant stone box, so it would make the most sense to have the enormous open doorway facing towards where the sun comes up. They even acknowledge that Menidra is built with a solstice orientation, so it is clear that they gave a shit about where the sun comes up. I can go on to prove this even further, because in the renders they show, here's my top-down view, they show that the temples have a open roof in the middle. That's the single worst drawing I've ever made. They have an open roof. There's the base of it. Now it just looks like a cake. Okay, this is just getting worse. I'm gonna quit while I'm ahead. Either way, they have an open roof. So by the time the sun is up here, it's shining the rays right down into the middle. You can do your ceremony inside, whatever, full daylight, voila. However, in the morning when the sun is super low, you're not going to be getting any sun inside. So how do you combat that? You leave the giant open doorway facing towards where the sun comes up. You can literally go onto a sunrise map and see where the sun comes up at any day of the year. And on the days when it's the darkest, in the winter time, this is going to be the horizon that the sun is passing over, so you're gonna get the most light into the temple. But I don't know, that's just a hypothesis. It was probably them trying to warn us by pointing their doorways at a particular star in the sky. Now I think this is a pretty stellar hypothesis, if I do say so myself. Excellent suggestion from whoever that was, by the way. Not only can I semi-prove or at least support this theory, I can also absolutely dunk on the star theory. This is the sun. This is a star. This is a doorway. What do all three of these things have in common? They are all things that Graham Hancock has a loose understanding of. If I was building a temple, and I had a doorway that was big enough for a grown-ass man to walk through, I don't really know how precise I would be able to be with aiming the doorway at a particular star in the sky, especially when that star doesn't even really cast that much light. It's mostly just a glowing dot. However, the sun is, you know, dummy bright, and so being able to have this massive open doorway that is pointing more or less in the direction of the sun and allowing all that light to flood through would be the most important thing you could have. And tangential to that is, how would you even orient a doorway towards a star? Like, it is a pinprick in the sky that's constantly moving. Let's say, hypothetically, these temples, instead of having a giant doorway, had a massive stone block that they had managed to bore a hole through. And the theory was that if you look through this hole at a certain time, you know, summer solstice, winter solstice, whatever, you would be able to see Sirius through it. Now that I could get behind, because that is very precise. It is meant to line up with the star, but you can't use that argument when you're talking about something that's as big as a freaking doorway. It's just a really painfully weak argument. But that's the evidence that they use to support that all the temples on Malta were built a lot longer ago than the archaeological community wants you to think. So why are all the doorways facing in more or less the same direction with mild variations? You know, what are they trying to tell us? What are they trying to point at? Let's think about this one for a second. You're orienting doorways towards the sun, and the only thing that matters is getting as much light into the temple as possible, and you're not worried about building it with mathematical precision. Oh wait, they all face slightly different directions because it wasn't built with mathematical precision. The idea that the orientation of the doorways being slightly off each time only means anything if you're insisting on it pointing at a star, because that's the only thing that has that level of pinpoint precision that the slight variations in doorway would actually matter. Once you realize that this is probably just facing towards where the sunlight comes from, you realize that these variations mean nothing. I guarantee you when these people were placing stones that weigh multiple tons each, they probably weren't like, damn it, we're like an eighth of an inch off, just push it a little bit. No, you drop the stone and you put another one on top of it. Just common sense, people, come on. To put a nice little bow on this episode, Graham Hancock tries to find something else to talk about with Sirius. I've not made nearly enough puns about Sirius throughout this episode. That's really sad, actually. Thank you. The next claim that Graham Hancock makes no sense. He points out the fact that Maltese fishermen have the Eye of Horus on their boats, and that ancient Egyptians also really liked Sirius, and that ancient Egyptians had a creation myth. Yeah, I don't really know what his point is here. I think he's trying to prove that they were all taught by a lost civilization, but I think he forgets something. Gianfranco, show us a map. Well, there's Malta, and there's Egypt. And what do you think was going on in there for, you know, most of human history? Oh, people sailing around in boats, talking to each other, trading even, you know, disseminating culture throughout multiple groups of people. Tickle me baffled of how they got the Eye of Horus on their boats. It must have been Atlantis. This island would have been like a highway exit for the ancient trade routes of the Mediterranean. Look where it is. There's also a Maltese population in Egypt. These were all nautical, seafaring people. They lived on an island. Of course they knew what the Egyptians were. This is such a goofy theory. God. Now, I've said Atlantis a lot, but Graham Hancock hasn't. Well, until now. Because Graham Hancock ends this episode with greasing the skids to talk about Atlantis. And so next episode, we're going to Atlantis. Hey, what's up guys? It's me, Off-Camera Milo, and I'm here to tell you about today's sponsor. Just like blinged out Milo told you earlier, today's sponsor is Ground News. I think it is safe to say that we are all familiar with media bias, considering that you are watching a video essay literally about media bias. So as you won't be surprised to know, this creeps into every aspect of our life, infiltrating our news feeds through algorithms. And it is through these algorithms that biased news sources are able to feed us things that will, well, never let us challenge the ways that we think. Critical thinking. And so thankfully, there is a solution. I already did this. Ground News. Ground News is the world's first news comparison platform. The Ground News feed shows you how different news topics are being covered by different news outlets. Not only does it show you the news articles on the same topic from different sides of the political spectrum, but it also labels those sources so that you can be better informed as to the biases that you may be receiving. Now, obviously, I'm a big fan of using Ground News for, well, you know, just a news feed, but one of my personal favorite things to do when I'm just sort of doom scrolling on random apps is to look at Ground News, find a recent, very polarizing political topic, and then see how the different sides of the political aisle are commenting on it. It's always hilarious to see how easily you are able to twist words to become some sort of propaganda when you look at all of them next to each other. Ground News also isn't just for the United States. It offers international news, which is something I love because, hard though it may be to believe, there are other countries than the United States. And so it allows me to be not only more informed about global news, but also spot biases before they are able to implant themselves in my head. So if you are looking for a better way to have a news feed, I suggest you to look no further than Ground News. You can use this link right here, which is also the link in my description, to use Ground News for free. They also have a subscription service where you get access to all their little extra bells and whistles. I would like to give a massive thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this video. And now, let's get right back into it. Ancient Apocalypse Episode 4, Classes in Session. Ooh! Ancient Apocalypse Episode 4, Ghosts of a Ground World is... Ground World? Ghost of a Ground Beef is the worst episode in the entire series Ancient Apocalypse. Now, what is my criterion for judging what the worst episode is in this entire series? It's because this one has almost no archaeology in it. In previous episodes, Graham Hancock has taken us to places like the Grand Pyramid of Cholula, Gunung Padang, and Menidra, and some of the other temples on the island of Malta. But for this episode, Graham Hancock goes aquatic and brings us to the beautiful island of Bimini. This episode also starts with one of my favorite quotes from the entire series, where Graham Hancock, beginning the episode with his usual punch at archaeology, says, "I am no more a pseudoscientist than a dolphin is a pseudo-fish." Now, that's a sentence that is so profoundly confusing that I actually had to spend several minutes trying to decipher it with my friend.
That if he is a pseudoscientist, then a dolphin is also a pseudo-fish. How would you define a pseudo-fish? What's the definition of just pseudo?
Not genuine, serious, or a sham. So a sham fish.
Okay. He is no more a fake scientist than a dolphin is a fake fish. And lo and behold, a dolphin is a fake fish.
Is a fake fish. You just can't make this shit up, man.
I'm pretty sure that Graham Hancock is saying that he is a pseudoscientist. What I will say is that this is the most confusing part of the episode, and if the most confusing part is this opening line, then we're off to a good start. He also calls himself an investigative reporter, which is really neither here nor there. I just think it's really funny. Normally, investigative reporters are really good at investigating, but I guess some of them are really bad at it too. But who am I to judge? All right, let's kick this lesson off with the Bimini Wall. For those of you who have seen the series, you're probably looking at that and thinking, Bimini Wall? Pfft, that's not what it's called. It's clearly called the Bimini Road. Ooh, look at that. Louis. The reason why I clarify that this is the Bimini Wall and not the Bimini Road is because it's very similar to the Dendera Light conundrum, where if you use a word like road, it plants in your head the idea that that's exactly what it is. I mean, to be fair, wall could also give you the idea that they're going to be talking about a real wall, but at least it's not quite as associated with something humans build. This is the Bimini Wall. It is a geologic feature that lies off the coast of the island of Bimini, which is right near the Florida Panhandle. Now, Graham Hancock says that this geologic feature is a stretch of road from the lost civilization that he is looking for. Essentially, this is the road from Atlantis. Damn. Now, I'm going to do a quick recap of all of their evidence for why this is the road to Atlantis. Oh, I'm going to need a lot more space for this because it goes pretty deep. It looks like it. Now, for those of you who have been subscribers of my channel for a long time, you'll know that the most important piece of archaeology is if something looks like something else, that is a